Hello people, very welcome to this session on what Canada's data strategy means for you. My name is Matt Ross. I'm a contributing editor at Global Government Forum, the organisers of this event. I've spent the last 20 odd years watching governments around the world. I'm also a Brit, and I'm afraid I don't speak any French really, but if you wish to speak to the panel in French, you're very welcome to do so at any point. We're here to talk about the data strategy's implications for staff across the workforce, ideally particularly non-digital staff, such as service managers, policymakers, project managers. We've got an amazing panel here with the three key authors of the data strategy. To my left, Cara Beckles, Chief Data Officer of the Privy Council Office, then Tom Dufour, Director General for Strategic Data Management at Statistics Canada, Chief Data Officer Stephen Burt, who you heard this morning, and then Michael Langton, who's Strategy Lead for Advanced Analytics and Artificial Intelligence at Converge Technology Solutions. If first Stephen, Tom and Cara will talk us through some of the strategy's key provisions, update us on progress, and then Michael, I think, will give some examples of how data can improve staff tools and citizen services. We want this session to be as participatory as possible, so we'll save as much time as possible for you guys to put questions and also give your views. With the panel quite curious about your perspective on the data strategy, so we've got a few questions which we put to you. They're on the board. Which of the strategy's provisions will be most helpful and important to you? What's your biggest headache in trying to get more value out of data in your working life? What else should Canada's public service leaders be doing to get better value from data? So have a think about those questions, and if you have any particular views on them, we want to hear them after the presentations, along with any questions you have for the panel. Right, so let us please go to Cara.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here at this event today. So I'm going to get us started, just talk a little bit about our data strategy journey here in Canada, in the federal government, for those of you who might not be quite so familiar. So the first federal data strategy for Canada came out in 2018. That was very much a reaction to results and delivery and this following of Sir Michael Barbour and deliverology. And it really focused at that time on gathering data so that we could better understand how our programs were being delivered, so that we could follow the progress that they were making, course correct, and actually make sure that we're measuring things along the way so that we reach the results that we're aiming for at the end. And that data strategy at the time was very much, we were early in our days of really focusing on data as a full government. And it was very much meant as a guiding star. So there were goals, there were principles, there was like a framework to follow, but it was very much sort of setting a guiding star out there. This is what we're aiming for. And then for the most part, departments and agencies were left to their own devices to figure out what were their priorities, how were they going to align their sort of internal priority setting with the federal one. And so, fast forward from 2018, a few years later, we were going through a global pandemic. The way that we deliver our services had completely changed. We had sent public servants to work from home and invested in technologies to enable them to do that. And at the same time, we were going through, as a government, rapid service delivery at a pace that just really isn't normal for what we do. We usually take a long time to think through a new program and how we're going to deliver it. But things were being kind of thought of, delivered, those pandemic benefits were going out in a matter of months, and then things were being adjusted and tweaked. And it changed how we thought about how we deliver programs, being more agile, and how we deliver. There was a lot of benefits that came out of that, but there was also a lot of corners that were cut along the way. So we learned a lot from that process. And we also know that, the expectations of Canadians, and this was talked about at the keynote this morning, changed as well in terms of how the government delivers services to Canadians. The expectation is that it's digital first. People don't want to go to a government office somewhere and, wait for an hour, with a ticket in their hand waiting for their number to be called. So all of that change sort of participated how we thought about what do we need next for a renewed data strategy. And we started thinking about this during the pandemic. It was published in March of this year with a change in priorities, a change in focus. We didn't mess around with the original framework too much. We made a couple of adjustments here and there to refocus and reprioritize it, but overall it was sound. Where we were heading was sound. What changed though, I think, was that rather than just being a guiding star and telling departments, aim for this, the intent was to be much more prescriptive and make sure that we're all headed in the same direction. One of the things that we discovered during the pandemic was that sometimes when we were trying to do something, and then when we had to do something else that might be similar but a little bit different, a lot of times we're starting from scratch all over again because we didn't have our data foundation solidly built. So that's sort of been the focus of this renewed data strategy, is that how do we build those foundations so that as we move forward, when we do something new, we're making it easier on ourselves. We're building off of the existing foundations. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues who will talk more in depth about some of the pillars of the strategy and how some of those pieces are pulling together and kind of moving us along on our journey and making sure that we have the governance and the pieces in place so that we can make decisions and pull things together.
Thanks, Kara. That's a really good way to put the whole context together. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un vrai plaisir d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. So, building on the work that's already been done, progress that's been made across the public service, the strategy itself is built on 4 missions, if you will. And these tend to be focused on achievable, meaningful, and high impact objectives that we're hoping to touch on. And this morning, I'm going to talk to you about the first 2 missions. The first one is considering data by design. So this is in all stages of government activities. And I'm also going to speak about the second mission, which is effectively stewarding data for decision making. So data by design, what do we mean by that? Well, data by design is it's about being strategic with data. It's about having the right data at the right time. And it's about thinking about data up front, as opposed to later in the process when all of a sudden we figure we need data. So we want a public service of the future where data is more integrated into government structures, into our operations, and into the decision making. So to enable this, we've got 3 areas of action. The first one, data leadership responsibilities need to be clarified within and across the government of Canada. Planning for data activities must be embedded in policy, in program and service development, and also monitoring and evaluation. And finally, there really has to be clear expectations from central agencies related to the appropriate resources that we put into our data activities. So what does this really mean for the public service? Well, it means we'll do better at embedding planning into our data activities. And I think that's a really important piece of where we really want to be driving as an enterprise. Policies, programs, and resources need to be built around data questions. And there has to be planning for those data needs, like I said, upfront when we're putting things together as opposed to later downstream. And we'll be moving towards ensuring that those with data responsibilities are really actively contributing to the programs, the policies, and that they're being established and managed right at the beginning. The second mission, which we call data for decision making. So if I was to put sort of the context around this, the federal government needs to measure what matters to Canadians, support decision making, and spur innovation. And I don't need to tell this crowd those things. We also need to have good, reliable, and trusted data. It's data we can trust. And in an age of misinformation and stuff, we really want to make sure that we're getting down to that. So building on mission 1, which is about putting data at the forefront, this is more about the stewardship of the data that we have. And it's about getting the proper enabling to be able to get from data into insights. So this is about data foundations. It's if you really want to unlock the full potential of the data, and we all know now that to really get into those deep insights of data, you really need to be integrating data, economic, social, environmental, all these things. What you need to enable that are good data foundations. So this mission is really about interoperability. It's about data standards. It's about FAIR principles and data quality. So what's this going to really mean to the public service? Well, we're going to be working towards establishing a data stewardship model. So defining data domains and finding and putting in place those frameworks and practices that are required to be able to effectively steward the data in those domains. We're going to be working towards enterprise data standards. And in fact, we've made really good progress on this. We now have an enterprise data reference standard on Canadian provinces and territories, which is now published and I believe in effect as of yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, right? So anyways, so really good progress that we've made there. And we're committed to making sure that there's more of these reference standards are coming in collaboration with different forums and processes to really make sure that we actually continue to move in that direction. And finally, when we talk about transforming data into insights, well, this is where we start talking about infrastructure and tools and stuff like data hubs, for instance, and making sure that we're giving good guidance on how to effectively do that and pull things together. So that's just a little bit of an overview of those first 2 missions. And now I'll pass it over to Stephen to cover mission 3 and mission 4.
Thanks, Tom, and rebonjour tout le monde. It's good to see you. Is the mic working? Hear me? All right. Up. Okay, we'll try that again. Rebonjour tout le monde. Thanks, Tom. So before I talk to you about the last 2 mission areas, which are enabling data-driven services and empowering the public service, and you heard me talk a little bit about them in the keynote if you hadn't fallen asleep by then. The elements that I think I would also like to underline about the data strategy renewal is that when you look at it, it's very deliberately the 2023 to 2026 data strategy renewal. Looking at sort of the journey we'd been on from 2018 through COVID and whatnot, and looking at the most successful policy suites that we'd seen from a TBS standpoint in terms of things that were fresh and focused on. The Directive on Automated Decision-Making in particular, where we'd set ourselves a 6-month goalpost for renewing regularly, which was bananas, right? You can't renew a policy every 6 months, and we didn't. We've now given ourselves 2 years, so you have at least a year of operating it before you go in and make changes. But the goal with the data strategy, given that this is a field that evolves so consistently, we want to put a deadline in, force ourselves to go back on the policy side with a specific refresh again in that 2026 timeframe, so we can move through these very sort of crunchy objectives we set for ourselves, see where we've gotten to, measure ourselves against them, and then go back and do it all over again so that we keep making progress. I think that's a really important element to what we've done here. In terms of the 2 mission areas that I want to talk to you a little bit about today, enabling data-driven services, where the 2 Tom talked about are really foundational. Enabling data-driven services is really where the rubber hits the road, right? So bringing together that triad of data, technology, and business in order to drive results for Canadians and for internal employees and others within the public service too when we deliver internal services. The key to this, there's a number of specific areas under there, but the key to it is really making sure that we are focused on that user experience piece, that we are driving not just where the tech and the data is going to come together, but also where the business has to change the way it's always done things in order to actually take advantage of the data and the tech. And underpinning all of it is data sharing. I think that is the key element when I look at what we've delivered in the last year, and I'm super pumped about the reference data standard, our first ever on provinces and territories. It seems like a real no-brainer, and frankly it was, but it took us a decade. because we didn't have the governance in place to actually make the decision. So now we've got one, we know how to do it, we've kicked the tires on the governance decision. We're going to keep on driving them as we go here. But data sharing, when I look at what we want to do in the services area, data sharing I think is the next big thing. How do we actually tweak the culture, put the right pieces where they need to be into legislation and policy in order to enable it, make sure the culture understands that we've enabled it, and some of them do some myth busting around what you are and are not allowed to do in that space, and actually drive that whole ecosystem across the federal public service into a way where we actually are sharing the things that frankly citizens think we're sharing already and are a little bit shocked and disappointed when they realize they have to tell us over and over and over again on this stuff. Empowering the public service, I think, speaks to all of you who are here from Government Canada departments and agencies. When I look back to when I started in this field in the early 2018 timeframe, we've actually made great strides on data literacy. People know what they're talking about a lot more than they did even a few years ago. There's still some work to be done, I think, at the most senior levels where they have to think through what their business objectives are, into what it is, how they're going to achieve those and how they're going to measure whether or not they're achieving those through data. But for me, the empowering the public service piece is about bringing together the tools and the skills, but also about building that digital community. We've got organizations like StatsCan that this is in their DNA, but for most of the rest of us, it's not, right? So actually building up that sense of community, which frankly, from a Treasury Board Secretariat standpoint, runs all the way from access to information officers, processing those requests day in, day out with no real information management tools, no adequate information management tools, all the way up to the high end of the digital skill sets and the management of the information technology community and the appointment of C-suite, chief data officers, chief service officers, chief information officers, chief technology officers, understanding that ecosystem and how the entire digital community plays within it. So that mapping that out is going to be really, really important to us. The only other point that I wanted to make, which I should have made in the services side, but before I hand off to Michael here, is the other piece on the services side that is day in, day out important from where I'm at now is Indigenous data sovereignty. In partnership with our colleagues, Indigenous Services Canada, as well as at CERNAC, but mostly with ISK, working across First Nations, Métis, and Inuit groups to try and figure out how we are actually going to enable them the way they each need to be enabled to actually take the data that we've got and to manage their own data themselves is a big undertaking under our UN obligations that were passed into law last year. So I will leave it there. Michael, and pass it on to you.
Thank you, Steve. Come on? Yeah? Okay. I would challenge that I may have the shortest resume of anybody on this panel for sure, probably in the room. My name is Michael Langton. I'm from Converge Technology Partners. I founded a analytics practice at a company that some of you might be familiar with, based in Toronto, Newcomp Analytics, 28 and a half years ago. So I've had one job doing one thing for all of those years, and now I'm continuing that. My company was sold to Converge Technologies, which is one of the biggest Canadian technology companies that many of you are not familiar with. Roughly $2 billion of revenue, Toronto Stock Exchange, publicly traded company. My part-time job as well is I sit on the board at Queen's University for the Masters of Management Analytics and AI program, which is a really interesting viewpoint in industry in the public and private sector. Our chair of our board is the head of analytics for Disney in Orlando. So I get to hear a lot of interesting perspectives, considering it's a Canadian institution, on both sides of the border. And I certainly learned some things this morning from the keynote from Claire as well. So this is a really fantastic opportunity to share what's happening in the public sector internationally. At Converge, where we fit into this conversation is with each of the four missions, we provide basically the practical help. So think of the large strategy 3-ring binder consulting engagement and then go the opposite. That's where we fit in. So we're the short stapled 10-page, 3-month assignment group to partner with each of you. So we do a lot of things right now. ChatGPT has been a friend to all of us in this room because of the awareness that it brings around data literacy and analytics. And we're doing a lot of design thinking workshops for the public sector, which is just really exploring what those opportunities to connect the 4 data missions in the strategy to practical outcomes. So we are really an extension of your data strategy people and processes, from data scientists to data engineers, right through to folks that are keeping the lights on with digital infrastructure. And Stephen talked about data sharing, which brings into a lot of other things into focus. So now, as data and analytics people, when we're talking about data sharing, hybrid cloud environments, now we need to become cybersecurity experts. We need to consider a lot of other things that, in my central focus in analytics, I didn't have to worry about up until recently. And so the team at Converge through North America provides that, as well as we're doing work in 12 Caribbean countries. So we have an interesting bird's eye view of things, and this is a great opportunity for me to talk a bit about us and see how we can help each of your departments in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear the different aspects and the thinking behind it spelled out. And one thing I will say from a Global Government Forum perspective, where we look at how governments around the world are managing data, there is nobody who does it well without having that strong central voice saying that these are the standards, this is the infrastructure, this is how we talk to each other. It plainly is the way forward. And the difficulty then that countries around the world experience, of course, is how does the centre do that in a way which works for departments, which recognises departments' individual own needs, and which gets support of the workforce? It's really encouraging to hear you getting that common framework going with the provinces and territories, and that all goes very well. Anyway, the panel have done brilliantly. 24 minutes, that's less than half the session. We'll get to hear from you guys now. There should be a roving mic somewhere, I believe. Is there, Raquel? Right, people are coming up. Go for it.
Let's see if this one's on. Yes, okay. So I had a question. Stephen, you were talking about making data sharing a priority. So, I should introduce myself. I'm Liz Christie. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I come at this question of data sharing from a public health and generally health data lens. And a lot of the information about sharing health data, the decisions were made quite some time ago, early 2000s or whatever, about deliberately walling off the different systems with health information. And a lot of the laws, not just the systems themselves, but a lot of the laws were written to make sure that we're not reusing health data in an irresponsible or unknown way. How do we marry the two? Because now we know for public health surveillance, sharing that information across systems is extremely important to see the larger pattern. But at the same time, the people living in Canada aren't super comfortable with their health data being shared across departments, even within a single agency like my own. How do we go about balancing that kind of thing when sensitive data are on board?
Yeah, so great question. People always want me to start off on health data, and which is the black hole of Canadian politics. But anyway, look, I think there's a couple of things here. From a standards perspective, there's a lot of things we need to do around metadata. I think the Pan-Canadian Health Data Strategy has laid the foundation for some of that thinking. We've been partnering with Public Health Agency on a metadata standard, a revised metadata standard for the Government of Canada, which will help us at least make sure that the foundational pieces are interoperable in the right kind of ways. We're never going to get to good data sharing unless we can assure Canadians that their data is secure, that it's private where it needs to be private, and that we're handling it responsibly. So we talk about, and I think if any of you were in the room for the Government Canada Data Conference back in February when we were talking about the soon-to-be launched data strategy at that point, what I call the by designs, open by design, secure by design, private by design, there's probably a bunch of others, like those things you have to think of at the beginning, they really all go together, right? You're never going to get to open unless you pass through secure and private. You have to deal with them as a group, because if you try and privilege any one of them, you really mess up the others. So how we do that in the data space is really, or sorry, in the health space is really, really hard. And frankly, not where I want to start, right? I think it's so politically charged in the Canadian context that, as a colleague of mine from the banking sector said to me when I was moving from defense into the Treasury Board for this job, start where the water pools naturally, and I don't think that's health. So, like, we need to get there with health, because I think on the flip side, when Canadians are concerned, and rightly so, about where their information is, but at the same time, if Quebecers skiing in BC and needs to go to the hospital and they can't access their health records, it's a real problem. So we need to find ways to make sure that we are providing, from a federal government perspective, the right connective tissue from one province to the other, or the provinces are doing it themselves. And there's a lot of interest in doing that. In fact, just had a conversation 2 weeks ago with the Institute for Citizen-Centered Services and the Joint Councils around exactly this, and they were also led the questioning off with health data policy. So we got to get there, but I think from where I'm sitting, there's probably some easier problem sets we can get to first, and I'm very much I'm supporting Health Canada and the Public Health Agency in terms of those efforts they're making with provinces and territories. The key, I think, will be finding a couple of champions in that provincial territorial space that we can build some working prototypes with, and then others will be incentivized to join. I don't know if there's anything anybody else wanted to add on that.
I'll just add to, I think that even from a culture, so not specific to health data, but from a cultural standpoint, we have to get away from this mindset that your data is either secure or it's being shared. We can actually make the data more secure by having very transparent rules around how and when it's shared, with whom, who can see it. And going back to health data, I was in the boat where my family doctor died, and it was old school office. I had like a paper folder in his office somewhere. I have no idea where that is now. Basically, all my health information is gone, or it's in someone's hands and I have no idea whose. So I would much prefer that there was actually a system out there that said, here's your electronic record, here's how it's going to be stored, here's who can see it, under what circumstances, and when. And then, as you talked about, that enormous value of actually pooling information together, not about individuals. We don't need to know individuals' circumstances or names or anything to be able to see. It's like, there's, a cluster of breast cancer here. Why? What's going on? Like, being able to examine what's going on and then actually come up with solutions. So I think we also need to talk about, when we share data, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're sharing your personal information. There's pieces out of that. It's a much harder soundbite to communicate, because it's more complex, whereas people worry about the big brother, and it's like, we don't have near that level of sophistication to go in and see individual people and all of their records, and we never should be able to. It's more about where can we pool it and extract value from the data to help society overall. But I think it is that piece about secure doesn't mean separate.
Michael, did you want to add anything?
This one's a tough one for Stephen, so I don't think I'm going to touch the healthcare side. I think one of the challenges to overcome here is really and I've done work with hospitals in analytics for the last 20 years, so I have firsthand view of how sensitive it is to touch that data and to figure it out. And I think the example that you brought up about which is more secure, a governed data set which is known, or a filing cabinet which is locked or misplaced in the future. So My view on this with regards to all of these challenges is really, it's all about the planning and discussions. In Claire's presentation this morning, it was interesting, a viewpoint that I hadn't really thought about chat. It's not healthcare, but the viewpoint of, well, it's pulling data that's now incorrect and inaccurate. And so it's not just absorbing information for consumption in the future, but also being able to remove information, which obviously with the longitudinal data sets that are here in the public sector is of particular importance. But I appreciate the question tremendously, and it is on people's minds. And I think your example about electronic can be more safe, secure, and appreciated by people as long as it's transparently, there's transparent rules and governance that will take time for people to get used to. But I certainly think, you know, your example about interprovincial travel and being able to have healthcare information shared in a relevant way, it's going to be an interesting, delicate balancing act over the next few years. But I think the pillars and the strategy at least now open these conversations so that it's not, we can't do it, it's how are we going to do it.
Certainly see around the world, you know, more examples of a failure to examine health data leading to poor practice or, you know, criminality even being missed. We see more examples of that, I think, than of people's data being shared or lost. Tom, did you want to comment?
No, I think it's been covered. Yeah, the health landscape is a complex one, for sure, right? But again, the principles hold, right? Data is more valuable the more it's shared and used and leads to that. You don't need to sacrifice protecting privacy and sharing. You can do both. You can enable data sharing. This is, you know, a federal data strategy where we still need to sort of explore this. We know that data is still siloed in certain places. We know that there are multiple players. And I think these are the kind of things where we need to just constantly make progress.
Thank you, Tom. Was there a lady over by this microphone? Somebody wanted to speak?
Merci beaucoup. Mon nom est Léone Valentin. Je travaille au ministère des Ressources naturelles comme évaluatrice de programme. Ma question concerne Data for Decision Making. L'un des plus grands problèmes que je vois dans mon ministère, par exemple, c'est la disponibilité des données ventilées. Et souvent, on a les données de manière agrégée, et plus c'est agrégé, moins c'est utile pour la prise de décision éclairée et basée sur les évidences. Ma question à vous, c'est une des composantes de cette pénibilité-là pour moi, c'est par exemple la loi sur l'équité en emploi qui a des catégories différentes alors que dans la force de travail, il y a d'autres catégories sur lesquelles on voudrait avoir des informations. Mais cette loi est une barrière pour collecter ces données. Et c'est juste un exemple dans un domaine, ça pourrait s'étendre à d'autres domaines. Vous, les spécialistes, quelles seraient les solutions possibles à ces problèmes?
C'est tellement une bonne question, incroyablement pertinente ce jour-ci. Puis en effet, c'est exactement le nerf de la nerf, le nerf de la guerre quand on parle d'être capable d'utiliser des données. Souvent, on n'a pas l'information qu'on a besoin. Quand on parle de données plus ventilées ou désagrégées, c'est vraiment ce qu'on souhaite avoir. Puis en effet, quand on regarde le potentiel des données, c'est vraiment d'avoir l'information qu'on a besoin puis de trouver une façon. Nous autres, à Statistique Canada, on est en charge on a été donné de l'argent dans le budget de 2022 pour un plan d'action pour les données désagrégées. Puis vraiment, le but de ça, c'est vraiment d'être capable d'avoir la puissance des données, puis vraiment d'être capable d'illuminer. Puis on l'a dit dès le début, ce qui va vraiment nous rendre là, c'est les normes, de s'assurer qu'on parle le même langage quand on parle puis quand on a des collectes d'informations ou quand on fait. Et puis, les data flows, si vous voulez, d'être capable d'échanger des données. Puis c'est un peu de quoi on parle. Puis, c'est une piste qu'on va arriver lentement. Mais pour nous autres, l'emphase, je crois, c'est d'être capable de donner des outils. Et puis d'être capable de dire, bon, ben, si un programme a besoin de faire une évaluation, si on a besoin d'avoir... Attendons une minute, commençons avec les fondements importants, puis allons d'une façon qu'on puisse faire une collecte d'informations, partager l'information de façon qui va vraiment être bénéfice pour tous. Mais ce que vous avez suggéré comme question, c'est un gros défi en ce moment, mais je crois, puis quand on parle des normes, souvent on parle des normes, des caractéristiques. Comment est-ce qu'on arrive de vraiment être capable d'évaluer la population cible qu'on a besoin? Puis pour moi, quand on parle du travail qu'on fait avec le CDO Council, quand on parle de la direction qu'on donne dans la stratégie, une des cibles qu'on a là, c'est vraiment d'être capable d'avoir des normes pour la désagrégation de données pour être capable de permettre ça. C'est une piste sur laquelle on est, mais vous avez exactement détaillé l'enjeu principal. Puis avant qu'on se rende là, c'est une question de trouver d'essayer d'autres manières, puis tout ça, d'être capable d'avoir des sources de données, d'être capable d'intégrer, d'être capable de faire du data linkage, des choses comme ça. Mais c'est vraiment, c'est pas évident, mais c'est terriblement important.
Je vais juste ajouter, premièrement, ventiler, c'est un nouveau mot pour moi. Donc, merci pour ça. Désagréger, c'est toujours le mot que j'ai utilisé. Donc, côté normes, il y a une discussion en cours actuellement entre le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor, pas mon équipe à moi, mais côté des ressources humaines avec Statistique Canada, en comment on va établir des nouveaux normes dans le monde de l'équité en emploi, justement pour les raisons que vous avez mentionnées, d'avoir la même norme en place pour nous autres qu'on a dans le force de main-d'œuvre partout au Canada. Donc, on va voir où ça nous rend. C'est pas fini jusqu'à maintenant. L'autre question, côté gouvernance, on a déjà, ça fait un bout de temps qu'on a eu un comité de sous-ministres adjoints pour les données désagrégées. Je suis membre de cette communauté, mais on a maintenant une comité des sous-ministres adjoints pour des données en général, des données d'information. Et ça, je vois de plus en plus, il faut peut-être mettre des sujets, coordonner les sujets entre les deux, parce que le côté données désagrégées, c'est très intéressant, mais il n'y a pas nécessairement le même pouvoir de prendre des décisions puis donner des résultats. Donc, un peu comme on travaille avec le conseil des gens principaux des données, je pense qu'on peut utiliser ce groupe-là pour faire des recommandations qu'on va de mon bureau mettre en place partout pour le gouvernement. Donc, on a des outils actuellement pour faire des meilleurs efforts dans ce domaine-là, mais comme Tom a dit, c'est vraiment important. Et merci.
Michael.
I'm going to respectfully sit this one out. As the only non-French-speaking person in my family born in Montreal, I'm going to have to take a pass.
Okay. Cara?
Non, c'était une bonne réponse par Tom de la part de Statistique Canada. Mais je comprends la peine parce que quand j'étais économiste en chef à Agriculture et Agroalimentaire Canada, c'était toujours un problème de la mélange d'informations entre tous les secteurs naturels. Donc, parfois, c'est impossible de trouver le détail dans les données nécessaires pour répondre aux questions. Et aussi, Tom, you didn't talk about also just like the micro data at Statistics Canada. So I know for a lot of departments and agencies, it's difficult because we can put information and our own statistics into Statistics Canada, but the Stats Act prevents the release of that same information back to you with the IDs intact. So they'll aggregate it up and you can see trends, you can see it combined with census data and other survey data, which provides an enormous amount of information. But sometimes what you want back is that really granular, individualized data for what you want to use it for. But at the same time, the public trust and people will respond to statistic surveys, to StatsCan surveys and the census because they know that data doesn't go any further. Their personal information will never be released. It's embedded in an act. So there's also a balance between that, the public trust, which is guarded very, very closely by Statistics Canada, and how far we can go. So, this is where, it's similar to the previous question about sharing versus protecting privacy and security. Sometimes there's a line and we can only go so far, but we should go as far as we can go, while making sure that we're protecting the safety and security of that data.
Yeah, no, just to close the loop on that. So your Statistics Canada is a data provider, but we also have data-related services that we do, right? And some of that is, as you know, we have access to very rich linked data sets. We have access to the census information, and sometimes we can help a partner by coming in and doing a service. Because we work under the Statistics Act, we can't just take a data set in, add information, and send the data set back. We can, however, provide aggregate data, the results that need and provide that insight. But the other piece that more and more we want to make sure that we're doing is that if people are going out and collecting more information, well then, time out, let's collect it properly. Let's collect it with the right standards, the right questions. Because that way what you're doing is you're collecting things that can be compared, integrated, and just sort of adds a lot of great value to the data ecosystem. So, there's sort of two roles there, but you're right, again, Kara's absolutely right. Often we do have people that come for the service part of that, pour être capable de donner quelque chose qui pourrait être utile, sans aller contre la loi de la statistique qui dit vous ne pouvez pas donner accès à de l'information qui est collectée sous l'acte, mais il y a des solutions comme ça. And when Stephen talked about the ADM level committee on disaggregated data, that to me, and you're right, we often talk, we got a data committee, we've got a DDAP committee. We want that one to be helping the subject matter policy side. Et puis c'est des outils comme ça qu'on peut vraiment être capable de trouver des solutions avant d'arriver à là. Alors c'est très pertinent.
Thank you, Tom. Yes, we have just 5 minutes left. I might quickly sneak in a question. You've got 45 seconds each, perhaps. Just like we presented the strategy, and it's successful delivery depends on a lot of factors. I wonder if each of you could identify one of this kind of key factors that's going to determine whether this lands successfully. What are the enabling factors to make sure this strategy results in implementation delivery? Cara?
Yeah, so super important. I mean, I've heard it said, government, they can either do strategy or implementation. They're not really very good at doing both simultaneously. In this case, we went into developing the strategy with implementation in mind. So the first strategy was, when you looked at sort of the goals in the strategy, some of them were very focused, very narrow. It was very clear how you would implement them. Other ones were things like, data will be used in all decision making across government. It's like very motherhood statement. It's like, well, how do you begin to implement that? Because there's so many pieces underneath that. So part of it is that developing the strategy, we actually created a map in terms of, okay, here's our ultimate goals. But what are the dependent pieces on which that relies, and building those pieces into the strategy itself? So it's not just sort of the ultimate end goal. It's, here are the foundational pieces that'll help you reach this goal, but also this goal and this goal. So it was literally kind of mapped out, and which ones are the most important, which ones have to move first. And that sequencing is also very important. And the other important piece, which Stephen has already talked about, is the governance that we have in place now. So before, there'd be pockets working on great policy or great projects, but there was nowhere to bring that to then have it be approved and implemented across government. That's something over the past year that we have focused on, so that we have the governance, we have the right people at different tables at different approval stages who are ultimately going to be responsible in some cases for implementing that. So they have a say in, it's like, okay, yes, we're going to approve this, but really it should be done in this way, because then it's going to be practical and I can see how I can apply that within my organization. So for me, those would be kind of the top two.
I come from the National Statistical Organization. I'm very proud of the way this strategy was laid out and presented. Kara talked about governance. We have that in place. We have something that's looking and pointing towards very concrete goals and outcomes. And to me, it's all about standards. And I hate to say that, I focus narrowly on that. I don't. But again, when you produce statistics, at the heart of everything, for over 100 years, we've been built on standards, and we know what the power of that is. To see the province and territory one come through, and it's like, I'm sure there's people here who are going like, what took so long? It's challenging, right? I used to have this old joke, people are tired of me saying it, but standards are like toothbrushes. Everyone understands they're important, but no one wants to use someone else's. And now we're getting to a point where we're actually getting all this coming together, and to me, that's the real, what I'm so proud of and happy to see moving forward.
So briefly, I think the key to actually achieving success is going to come down to change management, which for those of you who've broken the code know is what your IT project manager says to you when he means that it's your problem, not his. But the getting from the senior executive levels all the way down, getting it in their heads that you own the business process. We will give you new tools and we will facilitate how the data works underneath it. But at the end of the day, you have to change how you do your business in order to take advantage of that. And that is not intuitively obvious. In fact, we just had a discussion, won't get into the details, but had a discussion in the last 10 days where it sort of had to pin someone to the wall a little bit and say, okay, but you understand that the technology guys are going to deliver you this tool. It's a great tool, but at the end of the day, the tool's not going to change anything unless you as the business owner actually get out there and explain to people what it is you want them to do differently. And you can see the light bulb sort of go on. Our technology guys are great, but they don't always do us a service by speaking in code on some of this stuff. And I think business leaders don't always understand what it is they're being told. So there's an education piece to that. And there's also, in good Fringlish, an aspect of responsibilization that needs to happen in terms of making people feel accountable for what it is they need to do.
Thank you, Steve.
All right. Well, that works well for the fourth pillar as a business partner for the public sector, which is the empowering public services and focusing on talent. And I attended the session before this one, which was all about upgrading and leveling up skills. So in addition to change management and the governance and the framework, it's giving people the confidence to work with data, especially considering just think about the change in the analytics space with chat, and all of a sudden people are changing their viewpoint about what does a data literacy mean, and am I need to be a coder or do I need to be a gatherer of information and figure out how to use the tools. And so from our perspective at Converge Technologies, we're a federal vendor of record for analytics training. And so our job would be to help provide the people in this room the confidence and the skills to really exploit the power of the data that's coming as downstream out of the other three pillars.
Thank you, Michael. And that, that's actually alongside that central, strong kind of policy-making, standard-setting function. That's the other common factor you see in governments around the world that have got this right. It's that staff across the workforce and outside digital and data profession understand what data can do for them, see it as part of their job, see the potential for it to help them in their roles, and that is the other key enabling factor. And as Stephen mentioned earlier, that's what the Public Service Data Challenge is for. So if you have a way that you think the way that data could be better used in your organisation, then from 24th of October, send your ideas and we'll start to make them happen. And on that note, thank you very much indeed to the panel. Thank you very much indeed for you guys for showing up. If you could show your appreciation to the panel.